Welcome to Spookcast, the horror history podcast. I am Alfie Morris, and today I'm here with Sasha.
Hello.
And Cameron.
Yo.
And we're going to go through the linear progression of the history of horror movies, looking at their technical aspects, story aspects, their cultural impact, and how the culture impacted them. You alright, guys?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yes, good thing we had Tom in here. Get a good smoke thing going. Really get the atmosphere. I'm really looking forward to this. It's very scary. Alright, okay, well, I'm going to, of course, we're going to go through the progression. I'm going to, of course, look at the history and the writing aspect, how the culture impacted the films. Of course, we're going to start from the 1800s. You, Cameron, you're going to focus on the main film of that time, and of course, Sasha, you will know more of the technical things,
Yep.
rather than me and Cameron, who have no clue. Right, right. Well, we may as well start with the 1800s, the birth of cinema. In the 1800s, horror was a thing, of course, but it was more in terms of a play. It was more about how they could scare an actual audience just with set design and characters, and of course they had stories which focused on things at the time in which people were scared about, which they could personify through a play. And of course it was very much on sacrilege and Satanism, demonology, stuff like that. And of course, Cameron, from the first film, George Méliès, or whatever he's called.
George Méliès,
yeah. He started out very basic, and he of course made what's called that French name.
Le Manor de Diable, so that's the house of the devil.
You French man.
1896 it came out. First ever recorded horror film of its kind, and it's often mistaken for The Haunted Castle, which was a remake in 1897.
You said, my friend.
But it's crazy watching it today in today's world, and you're watching back then.
It's very similar to a play, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just a single camera, because they were technically limited, as you would know, Sasha.
Yeah.
It was just one camera, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It was just like one camera, and George Méliès didn't exactly know about how you can move a camera from one spot to the other to make it more a bit diverse into it.
It was like the birth of cinema. So they were just, their only reference point was, how are we going to get a play to be filmed? So they would literally film a play, a bit like a granddad in the audience.
Yeah.
That was the only way they knew what to do. So they were very limited for the time, of course.
The film was, it was pretty much depicted as a pantomime sketch.
Yeah.
So it was just referencing the theatrical fantasies, really, that people were... I wouldn't say people were really afraid of them until the film. Yeah. Because when
they'd never been visualised.
Exactly. It's it starts off with a bat, and then the bat turns into the vampire. Which
was scary for the time, because, it was like, we're going to introduce a character which you've never seen before. Yeah. And I think we'll go through this whole thing, and the most common horror trope is the fear of the unknown.
Exactly.
Which will be prevalent through. Have you got any more technical aspects?
I mean, the reason why I guess they were so afraid of it is because George Méliès didn't exactly know how to edit back then, because there was no such thing as, editing equipment.
So it emulated real life, because it was just a constant shoot.
When he would finish a scene, he'd obviously cut off the camera, and he would basically just merge all of the scenes together, so it made a jump cut every time. So you see the cauldron, it disappears, and then somebody appears with a fog coming up. So
so you could say that for the first ever film it was scary because it was more realistic. That's a good one. And moving on from the 1800s, of course, the genre went to great places, and I think as the years went on, especially around the 30s, it became more about character, like vampires and stuff like that, because of they weren't as restricted in the 30s as the 1800s, because they had better microphones, so now they could introduce dialogue, and that became a main part. And of course, the film I've got here is Bela Lugosi's Dracula, and that was amazing for the time, not just for its story, which focused on, once again, sacrilege and darkness, something that people aren't used to, personified in an actual character that speaks, but it was also technically well made. The makeup was something new for the time, and you of course know how the makeup was made.
Yeah, I mean, back then makeup wasn't very diverse. They had very limited things because back in the day, what do you have?
Well, they would literally just be the face paint, and that was about it. But with Bela Lugosi, had the first ever probably use of prosthetics.
Yeah.
That was prosthetic teeth.
So even just that scares people, because it's like, well, I've never seen teeth like that before.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
Yeah. And of course, you had a look at it, Cameron. It may not be scary now, but back then, they literally personified something which they'd never seen.
Of course, I mean, it was all based on like the public eye. Really, a lot of it. I feel they focus a lot on people's fears, and they're trying to bring people into that fantasy world and see if people actually fall into that loophole of believing it's real.
And moving on with that, as it went on, I think culture started to impact it a lot more, especially around the 50s, when the Cold War was very prevalent, because it became more about a fear of what's to come, as in with the communists. Could we trust the people next to us? Can we trust their opinions? Which is like personified in films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where it's like, can we trust people? And also it was, can we trust the people in charge with science? Because a lot of films in the 50s were very scientifically friendly.
Yeah.
And, that came with more prosthetics and technical elements, because it was just, all right, we can add a few teeth in with the 30s. Now let's, add some, something that's visually horrible. And of course with the 50s as well, with colour, I think that added another element which you wrote about.
It adds a bit more detail if obviously you have colour, because not only can you see blood properly, but maybe such as these like scientific ones where you open up a body and it's all gory,
and with the colour it added to the realism. It was like, you're going to experience something that literally probably a fraction of the population will ever get to experience through a film.
Following what you're saying, I mean, if you think of the first ever film, the House of the Devil, they have no sound whatsoever.
Yeah, and now with the 50s, it's
sound.
Just sound, because obviously it's more technically done. You can have you can literally have full-on soundtracks now with eerie noises which work really well.
Well, it's not just that. I guess it's kind of a positive thing making a silence type of film back then, because as of now, you even have those really eerie, just silent moment in movies, and it just scares you because you don't know what's coming.
I understand that, but I think back then as well, to be realistic, they didn't have the correct equipment for audio, but still, it is true. I mean, silence can cause a sense of anxiety, a sense of fear, so I understand. That is
really anxiety and fear are probably the main parts. And moving on to the 70s, the anxiety and fear of that time was of course cultism. A lot of people with the 60s, with the free speech movement, you could kind of choose what you want to believe in. So a lot of horror films depicted people who believed in things that weren't culturally believed in. And if we look at The Exorcist, it's all about exorcism and dark religions. And with The Exorcist, of course, that's what people were scared of at the time. Another thing not used to their mainstream belief. And with The Exorcist just came so much. I think The Exorcist was very groundbreaking. Of course, with technical elements they took from plays, of course. Yeah, they added the prosthetic face.
Oh, definitely. And
really personified. People didn't know what these cultural beliefs looked like. But with The Exorcist, they made, Linda Blair really look like what people would imagine, of course. And you know quite a bit, don't you, Sasha?
Well, yeah, because it plays on death, So how would that person look like if they were close to being dead? So it would add that element of rotting and just dark circled eyes and stuff,
Yeah, I mean, if you think of when the film came out in 1973, there was a wide circulation around a real incident where a priest actually had to perform a real exorcism on a girl who was supposedly possessed, and it's really just complements a lot of situations when films are made today that a real event can give a director
like talking about realism. I think realism is a great thing for horror because it's like bringing the darkness into the world we find comfortable.
Yeah.
And going on to the 90s, you can look at films like Blair Witch, where they wanted to deviate from what the mainstream was. They were like, let's make fear, let's personify something with effects, with makeup, with set design, with scary angles. With Blair Witch, they were like, let's make this as realistic as we can. Exactly. Let's get a camcorder, let's just film. And Sasha, it was just very basic.
It was very basic, like not much editing going on there. It's like somebody would shoot, a vlog.
And it's just to get that realism. Yeah. And it still takes from what was there at the time, sacrilegious, like things that aren't real, but they make it as real as they can without using tons of technical like prosthetics and stuff.
I mean, that's it, yeah. Like when people see things that look realistic, they'll be much more terrified of it and be like, oh my god, is that real or not? Was that based on a true story or not?
Yeah, I mean,
you quite like Blair Witch, like you knew it was kind of not based on a true story, but it was based.
A lot of especially young kids, as opposed to an audience, obviously it appeals to younger kids as well, because it is a group of teenagers who go into the forest. They want to explore a story that they've heard, and people were beginning to believe that it was real, so a lot of young people were going out there. But realistically, reading into it deeply, you'll find that Blair Witch Project was just a made-up story.
Yeah.
So it was successful in that way because people strongly believe, and still today believe, it's real.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely like, what's it? Especially now, like moving on to the 2000s, the way people believe things can be real. Even movies that are quite exaggerating, like It Too, people still will look under those. What is it called? Those like waterways, because it just becomes like iconic. Like with Blair Witch, it was like in the woods. Now everyone who see that will be like, oh, in the woods there could be something. Going on to It Too, it's a bit like Blair Witch, where it looks from stuff like the past, but it adds a lot of new elements. And of course, you know quite a bit about It Too.
It's very common. Like obviously, we know about the Haunted Castle, which is a remake of the what was it?
House of the Devil. Yeah.
House of the Devil, yeah. And it's the same. Like when you make a remake of something, it could either go two ways. It could go really good or really bad.
Yeah.
You know?
And the good thing about It Too is it takes from the past. Like nostalgia right now is very much a big thing. We look back on times like the 80s, and It Too uses those familiar parts of films back then, but it also takes from what's kind of technically developed now.
Oh yeah, it's amazing because like back then you saw the clown, and as us we think, oh, that's not scary.
And it was literally a clown. Like there was no effects at all. Yeah.
But now you see it, and it's just like this monster with these like big teeth and everything, just eating children. So
it's a fantasy again.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It definitely plays on people who are definitely terrified of clowns.
That's one thing that's been permanent in horror since day one, really, is the fantasy side. Is, like I said before, the theatrical fantasy side is to bring people in, is to bring people to believe something that realistically isn't true, but a lot of people are so terrified of it, they think about it so much, and then they believe it.
Well, that's true with fear, especially I think with horror films now, and especially the time we're in now. It's very much coming to be a lot about mental health, and it's affecting films very well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But anyway, we got into our very nice ad break, and I think we should definitely call for that now.
Alright, sweet.
Just take a break, yeah. So yeah, it's going well. I think we've established a pretty decent point of where we've kind of looked through them all.
Yeah.
And anyway, this is Scan Crazes.
Ladies, we're fed up of cheap, flimsy razors. Cheap, flimsy, and full of fluff. Why don't you try our new Scan Razors? Small, feminine, and pink. It caters to your feminine needs. With a new higher price tag, you can get yours now before your husband sees.
Scan Razors.
Alright guys, right, we're back. Okay, we just went through, of course, the whole history of films up to now. We just talked about the mental health part, and we talked about a lot of aspects, especially like technical, and we, of course, talked about famous films at the time, so if you're watching, definitely watch those films. I think, talking about films, I think it's about time we start with our favourite films.
Getting into the good parts.
I think, Sasha, you should start this one, and go from your favourite film.
God. Do you know what? I've got so many, but one that really stands out to me is definitely It 2. It Chapter 2.
Yeah, the one we just talked about, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love the whole aspect of it, of how gory it became, in the first one. It was slightly gory, but in this one, like, you saw blood and everything, and I just loved the way that they made the characters,
They were developed because they were literally like, we're taking these guys from the last film, we're bringing them in, and it's kind of nice because it kind of shows how a film affects a character. Definitely. Which I think is one of the main driving points of that.
Yeah, and I just, even having like a good plot twist at the end, maybe not so much a plot twist, but like the ending of how it was, I don't know if I should say a spoiler.
No.
but yeah, the ending.
How did it work in terms of like horror? Like, how did it use horror?
I think, you know what? A lot of people are actually terrified of clowns, yeah,
so it just kind of used that aspect.
It used the aspect of having a clown but making it with sharp teeth, because it's the same as like a shark, or anything that has got sharp teeth, like piranhas.
It takes like a naturalistic fear.
Yeah, people are scared of like things with sharp teeth, and they just have that into this clown that you might think is a person, but is actually a being.
I think that's the cool part about it, is the character keeps changing, so it's very focused on phobia.
Well, I feel that they brought it out in a very trending time as well, because with the trend of killer clowns and stuff, people
I was
are
about
terrified.
To say that, especially with
that's a weird coincidence.
What happened was like these people dressing up as clowns and going out to scaring people. Like it was the best time of doing it because of it, but quite dangerous.
You got any more to add?
No, I just go watch it.
Well,
really
sharp teeth easily leads on to my. Of course, as the guys here know, I'm definitely going to talk about my favourite horror film. Some people don't call it a horror film, but I would definitely say it is. And that would be Jaws.
Oh yeah.
I think we talked about it earlier, but with Jaws, we talked about briefly how people are looking under drains after watching It 2. With Jaws literally made people scared of the sea.
Oh yeah. I still to this day I'm just terrified of the sea.
If a film has that kind of impact, usually like we talked through like with the communist thing, it's the people that affect the writing of the film. Yeah. But when a film is so synonymous that it affects the people, it has to be an instant classic.
Well, it's successful then, isn't it? It's doing.
It's first ever blockbuster film.
Exactly. It's doing what it's meant to do. Like, not even trying to sound dark or anything, but horror film, to be successful, should have an impact on people.
I think where it works well is, we talked about this earlier, is horror films always take place in a certain place. It's the scary place. But what Jaws does is it took us to a familiar place and it made that scary. A lot of people looked at the sea like it's just the sea. But what Steven Spielberg did, the director, is he showed us the sea and said, we don't know what could come out of the sea.
Exactly.
It made fear. It makes fear out of something that's not there.
I mean, even these people could know that their oceans never will or may not have sharks in them, but still they fear it. You know what I mean?
Well, talking about fear, we're going to lead on to yours. It's very much about fear.
Bye-Bye Man. I mean, that's the thing. The Bye-Bye Man, when it came out in 2017, it wasn't all over social media. It wasn't advertised very much.
It's not like Jaws, where it's
I was just, we were browsing through a Cody box just looking for a film, and we found it, so we watched it, and surprisingly, it was probably the best horror film that I've watched in the last few years. Talking about like scary places, there wasn't really a scary place. I think it just emphasized the you know, the paranormal.
So is that how it worked? Like, how did it work, like, horror-wise? What did it do to scare?
I mean, what it was is it basically made people believe that the less you think about something, the less things will happen paranormal-wise. So whenever they thought...
So it's like anxiety, yeah?
Yeah, so whenever someone thought about him or said his name, he would come.
Yeah.
And he'd give signals, so a coin dropping, a sound of a train, fire burning. And one thing that they used a lot was, you know, when you're a kid and you see like you've got clothes hanging on something, and you picture it as a monster or something. They use that, and
it's a very image-based film.
Yeah, it aims a lot at realistic stuff, so people probably feel that, you know what I mean? And you know, it gives that sense of you shouldn't overthink things.
Well, we focused on imagery through this whole thing, and I think through this whole thing we have learnt a lot about horror. We've learnt how we can do it through image, how the culture impacts, how we impact it back, and our favourite films have all impacted people in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, it transforms like phobias. Yours uses like nostalgic imagery to scare. Mine uses kind of an unfamiliar place, and I think that's one of the best parts about horror is it just uses things to scare, basically.
I mean, it's not just that, it uses real life, like, events.
Yeah.
You know, with the clowns, like, it was an event that happened and it scared a lot of people.
The Exorcism, you know, there's many films nowadays that are very based on true stories, and I think that's becoming more prominent nowadays than it was before, because I think it's helped a lot through social media. A lot of people are becoming aware of stuff, and people, you know, are getting more interested in
so there's more fear out there because with so much communication. Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, no, that's one thing I actually didn't know a lot about, is when you actually was talking about communism and, you know, stuff like that, like...
Yeah.
I didn't actually know that, but, you know, now I do.
Culture just impacts everything.
Yeah.
And whatever, you know, like with social media, there's a trend. If there's a trend, no matter, even if it's a good trend, there's going to be some sort of fear.
Oh, yeah.
And people can exploit that through writing. That's kind of the beauty of horror films. Anyway, you got a few cards. Anything else you want to add?
Oh god, I guess no. I guess we've kind of like we've got everything. You know, mise en scène, how lighting works.
Like I said, I know it sounded dumb, but you know, horror is just using aspects of something to create fear. That is the whole point. If you were going to make a horror film, you'd have to figure out how you can use something to scare someone.
I mean, straight up, think of Lights Out.
Yeah,
making people scared of the dark. That is just the most simple horror film.
You use an aspect of something, something culturally relevant, an item, anything, and if you can subvert that, that's how you make horror. And I guess the opposite is comedy. Yeah. If you can subvert that to make something funny.
I guess you know, with Lights Out, that's like actually a good one to point out, because it not only plays with the fear of the unknown, because it has a paranormal element to it as well, rather than, I'm just scared of the dark. You know, it has those both in it, so it's like, I'm scared of the dark, don't like it when I turn my light on and off. Yeah. But there's a paranormal being out there that's trying to get me.
Alright, well, you think we're pretty much wrapped up?
Yeah, definitely.
Alright, well, definitely, I really enjoyed that. I think I've learned a lot. You know, I even got to the end of the script, which I don't think we did last time. But I'd like to just say follow us on Twitter, and of course we have a Snapchat account. And you know, it's been a good one, guys. Thanks a lot. That was a good one, boys. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. Cool.